Welcome into another Player to Watch feature heading into the 2019 playoffs. I'm your host, Michael Knight, the director of OKPreps.com, and it's time to take a look at 5 players to watch in the Class 3A playoffs. The playoffs are here. The 2019 regular season has come to a close, and we're talking playoffs, baby, as Class 3A, without a doubt, is wide open. There's going to be some great players. This is going to be one of the best features that we have. Some of the top players in the state of Oklahoma are in Class 3A, and we want to remind you before we get into all the players, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Just go to youtube.com/OKPreps and hit subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll get all of our player to watch features. You'll get all of our video content, highlights, championship previews, everything that we put out video-wise on our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and you'll get it even before we publish it to OKPreps.com. The same can be said about our podcast network as well. So just search OKPreps on iTunes or Apple Podcasts and hit subscribe. And when I say subscribe, you might be thinking, what is this going to cost me? It's not going to cost you anything. Not going to cost you anything on YouTube. Not going to cost you anything for our podcast network. Hit subscribe on iTunes or Apple Podcasts to get all of our podcast content throughout the 2019 playoffs. And as always, you can check out OKPreps.com every single day for more preview content and more content throughout the 2019 playoffs. But it's time to take a look at 5 players to watch in Class 3A, and it was tough. It was tough to narrow it down to just 5 here in Class 3A, but we did so, and we're going to start with a guy who's committed to TCU, wide receiver out of Plainview, Blake Nowell. Blake Nowell has been an outstanding force for Plainview the last couple of years, and there's no secret as to why he's one of the top wide receivers in Oklahoma. He's been putting up big-time numbers for the last couple of years, and he's taken his game to a completely different level this season. This was a guy that I thought was going to be pretty special early on in his career. Just when you look at him on the football field, the dude is an athlete. He has decisive speed. He has really good hands, and the size is what you want. He's a big kid. He's a legit 6'3", and the kid can run, and he shows that in his ability to change the game in special teams, whether it's kick returns, punt returns. He can make plays in special teams as well on the offensive side of the ball. Plainview certainly hungry for a deep run into the playoffs. They only have 1 loss on the season, coming way early on to one of the best teams in Class 4A and Tuttle. So you have Blake and Plainview definitely wanting to make an impact in this postseason. And I'm going to be honest, when you take a look at the bracket, Plainview certainly has an easier road to the championship game when you see top-ranked Heritage Hall, number 2 ranked Lincoln Christian. They're on the top side of the bracket, and because of that, Plainview certainly has an easier road. They don't have to worry about number 1 or number 2 to potentially make it to the state championship game. Blake and this Plainview offense have the ability to be one of the best in Class 3A and potentially make it all the way to the state championship game. He's a dynamic player. Like I said, easy to see why he's one of the state's best at wide receiver. We mentioned Lincoln Christian, their star quarterback Chase Ricke, finally in his senior season, a 3-year starter for Lincoln at quarterback. He has put up monster numbers every single year, and it seems like he's been just about as close to perfect as you can get this season when you look week to week at his numbers throwing the football. In a lot of these games for Lincoln Christian, if you've been following along with their season, you've been following along with their scores, a lot of them have been blowouts. A lot of them have been over by the end of the first quarter or certainly by halftime. So Chase Ricke coming into the playoffs, one thing that you can definitely say is he's rested, because in the majority of their games this season, he didn't have to play in the second half or certainly into the fourth quarter, as most of these games were decided by then. And yet he was still able to put up these monster numbers, getting closer and closer to the 10,000-yard mark. Now, I don't think he's going to be able to get there unless they go all the way to the state championship game and he just lights it up every single week. But hey, I definitely wouldn't bet against him, because he's been putting up video game numbers week after week. So him potentially making it to the 10,000 yard mark, maybe it's not out of the realm of possibilities this season. Certainly one of the serious contenders to be a finalist for this year's OKPreps Player of the Year award is he has Lincoln Christian on the verge of potentially making it to another state championship game. Obviously, you look down the road and a potential semifinal rematch with #1 Heritage Hall would certainly have everybody's attention if that were to end up happening, 1 versus 2. Nothing wrong with that. It'd be maybe, potentially, and I apologize to the rest of Class 3A, that could end up being the de facto state championship between those two teams. We saw it last year. Heritage Hall got the win, and then they rolled to a state championship. What happens this year? Chase Ricke and the Bulldogs certainly want to get a little revenge there. Our next player to watch, we go to Checotah for their standout, Jacob Barrett. What doesn't Jacob Barrett do? This kid is dynamic, one of the best athletes in Class 3A. They have him lining up at quarterback. He can run the football. He throws the football a little bit. He can also catch the ball. So he can do a little bit of everything. He also plays defense, has an impact in the special teams as well, and he has Checotah feeling really good about their chances going into the playoffs as they went into Week 10 undefeated in district play. They did lose to Lincoln Christian in that district championship game in Week 10, but they're coming into the playoffs with a lot of momentum. They've had a great season. Barrett has been exceptional every single week, making highlight play after highlight play. I'm looking forward to seeing just how far Barrett and Checotah could end up going. When you think Checotah, you definitely don't think of them as a powerhouse in Oklahoma high school football, but Barrett has them as a serious contender to make it to the semifinals, to potentially make it to the championship game. And similar to what I said about Plainview and their run to a potential state championship game, the same can be said about Checotah because they're on that opposite side of the bracket from Heritage Hall, from Lincoln Christian, and so by elimination, you don't have to worry about #1 or #2 in the path to a state championship game. Just simply by those two teams being on the other side is going to be a little bit easier. Our next player to watch is Berryhill quarterback Jacob Miller. Berryhill putting in another quarterback that puts up big-time numbers. And I had a lot of questions about Berryhill coming into the 2019 season. You had Cody Ross transferring away. He had so much success there the last 2 years. He transferred out of Berryhill, and you were definitely wondering just how good this team could be. They still had some talented players around, but who was going to play that quarterback position? Who was going to fill in and try to put up those big-time numbers that we've just kind of become accustomed to with a Berryhill quarterback? You enter Jacob Miller, and all he's done is throw for over 2,000 yards, 30 touchdowns on the season. And once again, Berryhill, one of the best teams in Class 3A, despite not having some of those marquee players that we've seen the last couple of years, they still have a really good football team, and they are, in my opinion, probably a little more angry going into the playoffs because they were stunned in Week 10, upset by Verdigris. Now, Verdigris is a very good football team, but at the same time, Berryhill hadn't lost a regular season game in nearly 5 years. I mean, this is a team that has dominated regular season after regular season, and they've been trying to take that momentum into the playoffs. It hasn't worked out the last couple of years for them as they've fallen short of an eventual state championship game. But Berryhill, you can make the argument that they're even more dangerous now coming off a loss going into the postseason. And because of that, they're not the district champion. They're the 2 seed. And they're going to make life extremely difficult as a team that's not your typical 2 seed going into the playoffs. And if they were to win their first round matchup with Stigler, more than likely they'll see Heritage Hall in the second round, and what a matchup that would be in the quarterfinals. That's a semifinal championship quality matchup, and we'd be getting it in round #2 because of the Verdigris upset of Berryhill. But Jacob Miller certainly has put up some monster numbers, and this Berryhill offense hasn't missed a beat, and he's a big reason why Berryhill, you have to take them seriously and be a little concerned about them being a 2 seed, not your typical 2 seed going in to this year's playoffs. Speaking of Heritage Hall, we go to our final player to watch here in Class 3A, one of their most dynamic players, Phillip Smitherman. the commit to Harvard, wide receiver, defensive back, does similar to some of the other guys, does a little bit of everything for Heritage Hall. And this has been a season for Heritage Hall where they haven't been as dominant as we've seen in years past, but the one thing that remains the same is they're number one, they're undefeated, and they come into the postseason as the favorite to win yet another state championship. I know a lot of people are tired of Heritage Hall winning state championships. You bring up the public versus private. I get it. I understand it. But the one thing I consistently say is if they were losing, if they were going 5-5, missing out on the playoffs, if they were going 7-4 and first round exit, nobody would be saying any of this. It's because they've won, 4 out of the last 5 state championships. That's the reason why people are saying they should play only private schools. Phillip Smitherman, a fantastic player that you definitely need to watch this playoff run for Heritage Hall because he is simply sensational, whether it's offensively, defensively. In their biggest game of the year, you take a look back at what Heritage Hall had to avoid earlier in the season. They nearly lost to Perkins Tryon in district play, and Phillip Smitherman was the guy who came up with the biggest play of the year, coming up with a pick six late in the game. I believe there was less than a minute to play in that ball game. Smitherman was the guy who came up with the big play, a pick six to untie the game and win it for Heritage Hall and conserve that number 1 seed, that district championship, that undefeated record as well. I can't wait to see what he and Heritage Hall do this postseason. And if they were to match up with Lincoln Christian in the semifinals, count me there. I have to see that game in person. They've been 1-2 all season, and I can't wait to see what would happen if they match up against one another yet again. There's 5 players to watch in Class 3A, getting you ready for the Class 3A playoffs. It should be a wild one. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/OKPreps. You'll get all of our player to watch features as well as all of our highlights and video content throughout the 2019 playoffs. Also, be sure to subscribe to our podcast network. Just search OKPreps on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, and you'll get all of our podcast content again throughout the 2019 playoffs. And as always, you can go to okpreps.com every single day for more content throughout the 2019 playoffs. One final time, I'm Michael Knight, and this has been 5 Players to Watch in Class 3A.